Hello, everyone. My name is Vincenzo Berghella. I'm super excited today for another edition of the Extraordinaire Within You. Again, with Kavita Narang, the wind behind the sail of this event, and we have a wonderful, incredible, I'm so honored guest. And Kavita, why don't you introduce Dr. Nicolaides?
Thank you so much, Vince. And thank you so much, Professor Nicolaides, for joining us today. It is my great honor to introduce all of you to a true force of nature and legend in the field of maternal fetal medicine and the pioneer of fetal surgery, Professor Kypros Nicolaides, who is from King's College in London. Professor Nicolaides is globally renowned for his groundbreaking achievements and research in the field of fetal medicine. He is the founder of the Fetal Medicine Foundation and has truly dedicated his whole life to innovating and advancing fetal surgery, which has resulted in millions of precious lives saved. His passion and expertise have not only transformed the landscape of fetal medicine, but you've also inspired and trained hundreds of physicians around the globe to carry on this very vital mission. So, your extraordinary journey and monumental impact have also been highlighted in the captivating Netflix special, The Surgeon's Cut, which I really inspire all our audience to watch as well. It's just truly inspiring. So, as you all tune in today, please be prepared to be inspired by the legacy of a man who is changing the world one baby at a time. Thank you so much for being here with us, Professor.
The honor is mine, Kavita and Vincenzo. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
And, as always, we always start off all our sessions with sharing a little bit of gratitude. So, Professor, I'll maybe let you take it off. Anything you want to share that you're grateful for today, and then we'll jump in after that.
I'm 71 years old. I had multiple myeloma a few years ago. I never thought that I would survive. So to me, I am extremely grateful for the fact that I'm able to be at work today. There's nothing else I love more than my work. So this is the greatest pleasure in my life.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
I'll share my gratitude as well with say Kavita, and then I'll give it to you. I'll be grateful today for my mom. She's 87-year-old. She's still around. My father passed away, but I was just talking by video yesterday by WhatsApp, as she obviously is in Italy, and she's doing well. Her spirits are good. She's not walking as much as I would like, but my sister was taking great care of her, and I can't thank my sister and my brother for helping her all the time. I can't wait to see her again. So that's my grateful moment. What about you?
Thank you. That's beautiful. As always, gratitude for family and to be alive here. But more importantly, today in this moment is to have the opportunity to learn from and be inspired by such great leaders like yourselves, and for you to be so kind and generous with your time for something that I'm trying to accomplish here, which I'm so grateful for, and also to AJOG and MFM for giving this platform for me to do this project of mine. So thank you all so much. Yeah, so, Professor, we like to jump right in. Like mentioned earlier, one of my favorite questions to start off with, and I know you were sharing a little bit with us backstage just now, is how did your childhood and upbringing kind of shape your life and your career to where you're at today?
So my father was a doctor, one of the first doctors in our area in Cyprus. He studied medicine in Greece. He went to Cyprus and he bought a donkey and he went around the villages. I'm talking about a period when there were not even any antibiotics around. He would stay in a village with the people until they died, and then he would go to their funeral, or they survived, and then the whole village would celebrate. He was then involved in the revolution against the British, because Cyprus was a British colony. So he was a sort of a hero or a terrorist, because it's the other coin of the same, the other face of the same coin. And then he went to prison. So when I was 2 years old, he was in a concentration camp for 3 years. And then he came out. He was in his early 40s. And then he went around the villages again. And now he was a member of parliament and a doctor trying to catch up with what he lost during the years in prison. He would take me to his trips around the villages on Sundays. And I had an extraordinary feeling of you arrive in a village, you go to the coffee shop, and then everybody gathers around the great politician, doctor. They tell them about their problems, and they always also go on to discuss about their economic problems. So life, what is now very trendy, this concept of the holistic approach to medicine, it was what I saw in front of my eyes. The people that their crop went bad because it didn't rain or it rained too much, and the illnesses that was associated with. And the love of the people for this one person. And I think that was what inspired me to do medicine. But in any case, it was much more than inspiration. I did not have any choice whatsoever, because he told me, you are going to grow up and you're going to become a doctor. So I never dreamt of becoming a footballer or something perverted like that. I was always, whenever I was asked at the age of 5, 4, 3, what are you going to do when you grow up? I said, I'm going to become a doctor. That's it. But then he did something very strange. I come from a part of Cyprus which is away from the capital. So he sent me to a secondary school in the capital as a boarding school, which was an English school. And I couldn't understand why the English that had imprisoned him, that I hated for what they had done to my father, he decided that I had to go to an English school. And then he told me, you're going to Greece, to England, to study medicine. On the day that he died, they gave me some diary that he kept in the prison, and then a letter that he had written to the governor, the English governor of Cyprus. And he said, look, I'm a great Anglophile. I love England for its democratic institutions, for its philosophy and so on. And the reason why I'm fighting is because I want my own country to be free so that we can reproduce what you have in England. I'm not against you. I just want you to leave my country alone. So I didn't have any choice. At the age of 17, he took me to the airport and he said, now you're going to go to England to study medicine. And that's it. And that is when I then started questioning myself, is that what I want to do? And the answer is definitely not. Because, well, it was the 1970s. In the 1970s, it was after the middle of the Cold War. The great country in which you live was engaged in imposing dictatorships in the whole of Latin America. And on the other side of the world, Russia was imposing dictatorships on the satellite countries. The great leader of England, Thatcher, was referring to Nelson Mandela as a terrorist. Yeah. So so I was a student, I was in the medical school. Do you think I was interested in physiology, pharmacology, histology, and anatomy? No. I was interested in demonstrations against the dictatorships, whether they were from the East or from the West. And as the years were going by, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was turning up at the university for the last 3 months each time to just study and get through. And I didn't know what I was going to do. But then in the last year of the medical school, somebody came, a new professor, and I went to his inaugural lecture. And that guy is Professor Stuart Campbell. He was a student of Ian Donald, the inventor of ultrasound. And he was an enthusiastic young Scottish man. He's 88 years old now, and his brain is younger than most of our trainees. And he talked about ultrasound. And the lecture was so inspirational that I told him, can I come and spend a month with you? Because in England, maybe you have the same in the States, in the last year of the medical school, we have this elective. And students usually go to Thailand, they go to Hawaii, the Seychelles, pretending that they're learning about medicine in other countries. But the bad thing about me, or the good thing, is that I absolutely hate flying. I find it so irrational. that you are up there, so far away from the earth in this metal structure. So I wanted to do my elective with Professor Campbell. And the first time I saw the images of the fetus moving around, it created this major challenge for me. Until then, there was an iron curtain that separated prenatal from postnatal life, and then suddenly this iron curtain is shattered. And then you begin to think, how does the baby grow? What is the interaction between the mother and the baby? Does the mother really always love the baby? Or is there sometimes a competition between the two? How do things go wrong? And that's it. I stopped my revolution and my demonstrations in London, and I devoted myself to this field. I finished, I graduated, and then I went into this new area of medicine. So you asked me about my father, and Alexander the Great said, I have two fathers. I have my biological father, and I owe him my life, but I also have my teacher, and to him I owe my good life. And my teacher was Professor Campbell. So that's my background.
Wow. So interesting. If I can follow up on that, Kypros, I want to talk about Oedipus and Electra a little bit. Going back to our father and the interaction. Can you expand on that somewhat? Being a son and being a parent later. Any inspirational thoughts or words of wisdom you can give to those of us who are sons and daughters, who are fathers and.
So, I would meet my father when he would wake me up at night after he came from work. And I was always scared of him because my mother, that was her role to bring us up, was always terrorizing us by telling us that I am going to tell your father that you haven't studied enough today.
Oh, okay.
So my interaction with my father was at night, being woken up to meet him, because he would go to work early in the morning before we woke up, and then would sleep at night before he came back home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would go to school, and everybody was telling me, you are the son of this guy. So there's a great expectation from everybody that you are the son of this great man. And then you grow up in these feelings of competition, thinking that you will never be able to reach what he has achieved. So you're always inferior to your father. So when he sent me off at the age of 17 to England, I was very grateful because I didn't have to have him around me all the time, feeling inferior. And maybe because of that, when I arrived in England, it was the first time that I questioned his values and whether. So he was a right-wing politician, and I became a left-winger. He was completely devoted to medicine, and I was not inspired by medicine because there was nothing special for me except right at the end. But then I was always scared of him. So in my 40s, after I had become a professor and so on, he would ring me. We would speak on the phone every few months, and he would say, "How are you?" I said, "Fine." So what have you discovered last month? They would say, "Dad, I haven't done anything last month." So he said, what are you doing in England? So I was scared of him, even then. I had to prove to him that I was discovering things in my 40s. Yeah. So I loved him. I owe to him his devotion to medicine, because I do have that now. Mm-hmm. And it was, yes, you mentioned Oedipus. Who was Oedipus? Oedipus was the guy that eventually killed his father for the love of his mother. So in some respect, you always have this complex between the son and the father. There must come a moment when they clash and they go their own ways. And my clash never happened because he sent me away. But most probably I never went back to Cyprus because I was scared to go back to Cyprus because I wasn't sure whether I would be able to compete with him.
The
Well,
island wasn't big enough.
so, and then of course, you have a different attitude also. He sends me he keeps away from me for 3 years when he's in prison. Then he comes out, and then a few years later, he sends me off to a boarding school. And there you then develop different values. You become part of a group of people, and you alienate yourself from your family. There are people that are very happy, and every day they tell me, I will go to my parents to eat my Sunday lunch. There was no such thing for me to go to my parents to eat my Sunday lunch. And then I go to England when I'm 17. So when I have my own children, I want to develop a more personal relationship. But then you cannot, because you are who you are. If you grow up in a completely independent way by going in a boarding school and then arriving in England at the age of 17 and then becoming a doctor and then getting trapped in the lab, the competition of medicine, the research, the discoveries, then you do exactly the same what my father had done. He comes and kisses me after I sleep and wakes me up, and I'm not sure whether he wants to kiss me and love me or he wants to wake me up and tell me off because I didn't behave properly for the day. So that attitude passes on in the next generation. Now, my children are both in England. My daughter is a doctor. My son is in the national health system. He's a management consultant. I leave them well alone. I don't want to interfere with them. I don't want to have lunch with them on Sunday. But every now and then we will go to a theater together. And I tell them, whenever you want to see me, but I don't want to impose myself on you. And that is the relationship that we have. And in a sense, it is what had to be by the way I was brought up.
So you don't wake them up at night?
I definitely don't wake them up at night.
Wow. Interesting.
No, that's incredible. And when you talk a little bit more about like your relationship with your father, apart from the parenting, from the medicine aspect, you talked about, you used to go with him into the village as a kid and watch his interactions with the patients. How do you think that memory of what you observed as a doctor-patient relationship, how has that translated to how you connect with your patients? Is there anything that you bring from there too?
Absolutely. And that got me a lot of the times into trouble because the world has changed. A doctor, like my father, and the conversation we had with Vincenzo, his father was also a doctor in a small town. There, the doctor had a personal relationship with everybody in the town. They were friends. They would go to their weddings, they would go to their funerals, they would be a family together. But the modern doctor is meant to be made of a hardboard, have no feelings, interact in a way that is not misunderstood, don't touch anybody, don't express your own views, be careful about how you interact with your patients. And we keep constantly having these directions from the medical council and so on. I'm not like that. I will touch my patients. And most of them like me to touch them. So when you tell a woman on the scan that your baby has an abnormality or your baby has died, I touch them. And there's nothing more that you need to discuss, really. The original shock with somebody holding your hand makes a massive difference. When I'm doing an invasive procedure, I get the patient to hold my hand. And I do that for two reasons. First of all, at the point when they will get pain and they may jump, already they will squeeze my hand, and I anticipate a few seconds before the jump what is going to happen. But the most important thing is the soothing effect that has on the patient, that we are doing this together. Wow. If I give bad news and the patient is crying, sometimes my eyes will water with them. I will embrace them. I will put them in my arms. You are not meant to do things like that. But medicine without this feeling is not medicine the way I learned it and the way I want to practice it. Sometimes people will complain. They will refer me to the General Medical Council. I will have a hard time, but I don't care.
Wow.
That's great. Can I ask you? You have inspired so many people, Kypros. I think, from my point of view, apart from the many articles, the change in fetal medicine, the preeclampsia and preterm birth, and so many things, you've inspired. So, like, I go around, and I was trained by Kypros. I mean, everywhere. It's unbelievable. And you mentioned Stuart Campbell in such a wonderful, emotional way. Can you kind of put those two things together? How much you got from Professor Campbell, who you met many times and is an amazing guy, and what you try to transmit, because the way you inspire, it's you.
So, Vincenzo, I then qualified in medicine, and then I became a research fellow of Stuart Campbell. Mm-hmm. Another great man, Charles Roddick. Campbell was the ultrasound man, and Roddick was the invasive procedures man.
Middle guy, yeah.
Yeah, so I was their first research fellow. Mm-hmm. So within a few weeks of qualifying in medicine, I was observing things, and we were publishing things. And before long, 2 or 3 years later, I was beginning to become one of the fathers of fetal medicine. And that's how I was drawn in. Yeah. Every day, every night, every weekend, we were together. We were with fellows. There were doctors coming from all over the world. That was the mecca of fetal medicine, at least in this part of the world. In the United States, I suppose, the equivalent of Campbell was John Hopkins. Mm-hmm. And there is a generation of people that were trained by John Hopkins. So people were coming to me. And that's when I developed this Dracula relationship with people. What is the Dracula relationship? You have a man that is becoming increasingly older and is constantly rejuvenated by young blood, enthusiastic 28-year-olds that come and they want to learn from you. Mm-hmm. And that became my next passion, Vincenzo. I had to train as many people as possible. So I had a private clinic. I was very lucky because everybody was against everything I was describing. And that was fantastic. The only good thing about it was that the women were convinced, the stupid doctors were left behind. For example, nuchal translucency. It took 15 years for the profession and the government to accept it as a method of screening. But in the meantime, all the women knew about it. So they would come into a private clinic. We were making a lot of money. All of the money was going into a charity. And my obsession then was to train as many people as possible. So there were thousands of people that were trained, and they went out to pass on that message. But then I was gaining from that. You know, at the moment, I give scholarships to 70, 80 people that come from all over the world. That is my life. I'm extremely boring, like my father, because when my father, at the age of 80, he was unable to see anymore, and there were hundreds of doctors that replaced him. He sat at home and he just wanted to die. Well, I'm not going to sit at home. I will die before that. I will stay in this office for the rest of my life. And I will be with my fellows. Every Christmas, about 40 of the people will come and spend the Christmas with me. And then every New Year's Eve, about 80 people will come to my house. And so we are part of a family. And that is, they inspire me with their youth and their enthusiasm, the Dracula, and they are given the opportunity to train and learn new things. That is the relationship. Is it good? Is it pathological? I don't know, but that's how it is.
Wow. No, that's so inspiring. And I love that you share that because, sometimes, especially in today's world, people talk a lot about like work-life balance and things like that. And they think that the life has to be just outside work. But you found a way to make your work your life, and you've built a family in your workplace. And that's sorry, you go ahead.
I mean, that's exactly the point. I mean, what should I go and do? Go and play golf on my own, or go to Florida and play golf with Trump. I mean, that would not give me any pleasure at all. I prefer to spend my time off with my fellows. So when I find a nice theater, and always the theaters that I like have a political content as well, because I have not lost that touch.
Yeah.
I will invite my children, but also some of the fellows to go together to the theater. So, so that I don't need to do anything outside work because this is my life. I enjoy that. I love my work. That's all.
Beautiful.
I don't think it's pathologic at all. I was thinking about this recently, Kypros. I don't know if you knew Professor Scambia, who was
Yes.
a bigger than life, person.
I did, and I received a message a couple of weeks ago from Leo Greco, who was one of my early fellows from Bari, who told me that he died, and I was shocked.
Yeah. And I've had the pleasure of spending some time with him. I spent some time in Rome with him. I was actually close to joining him at some point. Great honor of mine. And he in 2 weeks, pancreatic cancer, died. He operated till 2 days, before he died. And clearly he loved his work. He treated everybody wonderfully. He probably did have a Dracula thing. I never heard that thing, but it's so true. I have it as well. Young people who inspire you. And I think, he had a full life. Like, he was, even his daughter at the funeral said, at Christmas or, he would go in and round before, coming back home. And, he inspired so many people. He gave hope to so many women, with difficult things like you do with congenital anomalies and stuff. And I think he did exactly, each of us is different. And the fact that we follow our calling and our strengths, I think it's inspiring. Like Kavita said, what is balance really? I think the most unbalanced you are, the better it is. I don't know if you agree.
I agree.
I agree. Yeah, no, Professor, just thinking about all the things you've done, especially in the field of fetal medicine, I think you're such a creator, an innovator, right? Someone who really thinks outside the box to be able to come up with all the interventions that you did. Where do you think you learned to think that way, outside the box? Were you always like that since a kid? Or where did you gain this perspective? Did you train your mind to look at the world in a certain way?
When I was demonstrating in London against dictatorships. Because then you have a completely different perspective. You don't get trapped, as I said, in physiology, pharmacology, and so on, but you have an open perspective. So when my passion more recently was to help set up fetal medicine units in Ethiopia. I sent people there, I gave them equipment, Armenia, Macedonia, Albania, and so on. A lot of these underdeveloped countries. So I want to train as many people as possible. But you talk about outside the box. It is part of what I called before the interaction, the Dracula effect. What do I mean by that? When you have young people coming to you and they ask you questions, sometimes these questions are exceptionally irritating. But actually, if you stop for a second, because you knew the answer, you answered the question 10 years ago, why are they asking me this stupid question again? But if you stop for a second and you listen to the question, that is your next project. So actually, this interaction with people is what produces the new things. Laser, and in 92, 32 years ago, how did it happen? Well, at that time, a quite inspirational person himself, Yves Ville, was my research fellow. He had just come from Africa, and he came to my house and said, "Can I join you as a fellow?" I said, "Of course." And he was an extremely intelligent person. So we were having these interactions. So that night, when we were going to do laser, he went and stole a laser machine from the ophthalmology department, and we got things together very quickly. Kurt Hecker, another big man in fetal medicine, Wieland's Doppler, Eduardo Fonseca. He came from Brazil. He met me in a toilet. And I get irritated sometimes, and I make jokes about it. You go to a meeting, and you go to the toilet to pee, and suddenly somebody comes and stands next to you and touches you, and he wants to ask you questions. Say, what does he want, this guy? And then he said, can I talk to you? And I said, can I finish first? And then you can go outside. And then you go outside. He said, look, I have just come from Brazil. We did a study, and we gave progesterone in women that had a previous preterm birth, and it worked. Can I come and do a similar study in women that have a short cervix? Because that's what we were doing at that time. So it wasn't my ideas. It is, nobody has ideas of their own. A professor once told me that you have the wave. We are standing by the beach, and there is a wave. And suddenly, the wave will hit the rock, and that will break. And that will be the discovery. But you cannot discover anything unless you have the wave in the first place. Well, that wave is the work of Vincenzo in preterm birth. It's the work of so many other people, of Roberto Romero, for example. It is the work of Eduardo Fonseca, a very junior doctor that once meets me in the toilet and wants to do his next project. And this is how you interact, and this is how you develop new ideas.
Yeah. And then when you talked about laser, when the first time you did your laser, something so new, something no one's done before, and you're charting, you're like entering uncharted waters, uncharted territory. You don't know what can you share a little bit about what was going through your mind when you were doing that, or how were you feeling, and how did you navigate the uncertainty of all of it?
So a woman arrives. In that period, we were doing amnio drainages, and I kept watching women miscarry or deliver babies extremely prematurely, and then I was watching these babies becoming severely mentally handicapped, to the point that I had decided I'm not interested in this field anymore. I'm not going to do any more amnio drainages. I've had enough. And then we had these discussions with Eve and with Kurt, and we said, we're going to do this. But I didn't know what was going to happen. At that time, remember, if I want to do a trial now, and Vincenzo knows that very well, I will go through various ethical committees, and you will go to the R&D department of many universities that are anti-research. They're almost pathologically against research. They try to block you from, they find any excuse for you not to finish the protocol. And then it takes a year. Well, we discussed it. We arrived at the conclusion, and this woman turned up. I told her, I'm not going to do an amnio drainage. Somebody sent her to me because they told her that I was crazy, that I was doing different things. And we sat that night, and they said, we are going to do this tonight. I hadn't any idea as to what would happen. I didn't know whether I would press the button of laser and everything would burst. I didn't know, actually. I didn't know. But somehow, the woman, rightly or wrongly, trusted me. She saw that I was honest. I said, I haven't got the faintest idea as to what is going to happen. But that is the only thing I think I can do, and let's try it. And she said, let's try it. No ethics committees, no R&D departments, nothing. We just went, it was midnight, and we did it. And it worked. It worked. But the next two did not work. And the babies died. And that's where it's not you, it's everybody around you. And then Yves. Yves is French. He's the descendant of the French Revolution. He must be the great-great-grandchild of Robespierre. And he told me they decapitated half of the population. And I said, Yves, I cannot cope anymore. I'm a sensitive boy from Cyprus. Yves is my God. He said, Kypros, you cannot make an omelette if you do not break some eggs. You have to continue. Okay. I would have stopped. But Yves talked to me about the omelettes. And then we were lucky. The next couple went well. That's how you navigate things. We didn't know what would happen. We didn't really know at all.
It's amazing.
I want to ask you one thing, Kypros. Thinking of all you've taught me, thinking of the many lectures you gave, I'm going to ask you what makes you mad. because we're here to inspire, and I think you have done that very well. Tell people not only what to do, but what not to do. I don't know if you want to cover that. Just came to me while you were talking.
Well, okay. So let me take, first of all, my own research fellows. These are the more than 1,000 people over the years that came, that they listened to what I said, and then they went back to their countries. And many of them practice medicine well. Others do exactly the opposite of what I did. Instead of going there to serve, they go there and they have the secret now, the little black box, the stupidity of nuclear translucency. And they keep it as a trait for themselves. Obstetricians did that for generations with the Killan's forceps. They were hiding them. Yeah. So I was telling people, let's teach more for the benefit of as many women as possible. Mm-hmm. And here there were some of my students going to their countries and using the things that they learned against my own ideology to enrich themselves. That was making me mad. I was telling them, do whatever you want to make as much money as you want, but for God's sake, pass on the message. Mm-hmm. It would only be useful if what we learn applies to all of the women, not a few rich women. So that is my anger with my students. Over the years, as you get older, you begin to realize that some people are going to be like that. And however much I shout and I get angry, it doesn't really matter. You just hope that the majority of the people will do well and they will practice the way you want them to practice. Or you hope that they will practice the way you want them to practice. The second thing is the institutions, because you make a discovery, you have done your research, and you feel that you have very, very good evidence for a new way of offering a service to the women. And then, my God, the enemies of the people come along. Have you ever, one of the plays that I have seen was this, the enemies of the people. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Play? It's a guy that is in a small village, in a small town, and he's a doctor, and his brother is a mayor of the town, and the town is extremely famous for its baths. What do you call these baths where you go and you take a bath and then it has therapeutic properties. So the whole village, the whole town was making a lot of money from these baths, these public baths. And then suddenly the doctor does an investigation and he finds that it's completely packed with bacteria. And then a process begins where he says, but we must close these baths. Mm-hmm. And his brother, the mayor, says, you're crazy. We will go bankrupt. And then you see how the whole community wants to kill the doctor because their own personal interests are threatened. Mm-hmm. So we did the nuclear translucency in 1992. How long did it take before it was adopted in England? 14 years.
Wow.
14 years. I have been campaigning for what Vincenzo has done enormous amounts of work on preterm birth. But in reality, at the end of the day, from my perspective, unless the measurement of cervical length becomes part of a routine during the 20th week of pregnancy as a starting point, and then you can play with whatever you want. I published papers on stitch, I published papers on the pessary, I published papers on progesterone. Some of them worked, some of them did not work. But unless you have that starting point, how do you begin to have an impact on preterm birth? Royal College of Obstetricians. No, we must not do cervical length. And this is 20 years later. My academic father, Professor Campbell, in 1981 or 82, published in The Lancet a paper on the uterine artery Doppler as a predictor of preeclampsia, stillbirth, fetal growth restriction. You have the Royal College of Obstetricians producing idiotic tables, 50 pages on how to identify women that are at risk of small babies and so on, and which are the indications for doing an ultrasound scan. And I said, for God's sake, why don't we measure the uterine artery Doppler routinely in all women at 20 weeks, and on the basis of that, stratify the women for the management for prediction of preeclampsia and small for gestational age and stillbirth? No way. No way. Why? Well, in England, the vast majority of hospitals where they have ultrasound examinations, the radiology departments are in charge. But who is the radiologist that is remotely interested in obstetric ultrasound? If you are an intelligent radiologist, you're interested in interventional radiology, MRI, and so on. You don't want to do ultrasound scans on pregnant women and measure BPD and femur length. So the radiographers are doing the scans. And in England, almost as a principle of work to rule, they are refusing to measure cervical length. They're refusing to do uterine artery Dopplers at 20 weeks. And the Royal Colleges accept that. And it is now, 1980s, is 45 years later. And they keep having meetings and more meetings of how best to do this and that and the other. And that makes me mad. So the enemies of the people are the institutions that prevent the implementation of good clinical research. And that I will continue to fight to the end. And I'm not sure who is going to win, them or me.
You've clearly won by a long yard already.
I haven't actually, Kavita. I haven't. Yeah. Anyway.
But the way you change things, I think, Kypros, it's by inspiring like you do, by going on conferences, by having thousands of people around you. I see my own thing. That's how I made change. Like, I will publish a paper, nothing happens, and you've been there many, many times. And it's so frustrating. Like, hey, look at this, it's randomized, it's lots of people, it's exactly what people were waiting for. People say this was impossible, you did it, and they still don't believe it. But then, you do it, and yes, and often, almost always, it takes 5, 10, 15 years. But it's nice. I guess my next question is, what are you most proud of? Like, sometimes what I'm most proud of is to see that, a paper or 2 or 3, between you, like Roberto, others, it's there, and then finally, ESWOG or ACOG or SMFM or RCOG accept. It's amazing to me. Like, they criticize us, at the beginning, and then they come up and the guideline says exactly what we say 10 years ago. What are your most proudest moments? Because you won a few battles. Clearly, you did. Thank you.
There are so many things, Vincenzo. I think the most emotionally pleasing moments is when a woman comes and she tells you, I'm 35 years old and I owe my life to you. And you say, what have I done for you? And she says, when my mother was pregnant, it was the era of rhesus disease in the early 80s. You gave blood transfusions to me, and I'm alive today, and I owe my life to you. And then you say, bloody hell, am I that old? I often tell, you're 35 years old, but I said, 35 years ago, I was just a young boy in the fields of Cyprus. It must be somebody else. So that's the joke. But it's the greatest pleasure, isn't it? Wow. To have somebody come back to you that tells you that they owe their life to you. Is that true? Is it not? It doesn't matter. It really makes you feel very, very proud that you have achieved something. Of course, other things are in terms of academic achievements when they give you all sorts of awards, and then you begin to become a bit uncertain as to who gives the awards to whom, and is that completely meritocratic, or is it part of another political game? So you have the pleasure, you have the academic megalomania. We are all important people. We want to save humanity. We stand in front of the mirror in the morning and we say, we are going to go to work today. We are going to save a few more lives. That is the job of obstetricians, to constantly save lives when the lives would have been saved even if we were not there. So we have this constant reinforcement of our megalomania. We are life savers. It's not true. Most of the time it's not true. But you enjoy it. You enjoy it when you go to a conference. I enjoyed it when I saw you, and thank you very much for the invitation for the Congress in Rome, when there are thousands of people there and you give a lecture and they clap, you feel good. And then you carry on with your life. But honestly, the greatest pleasure is, as you mentioned, when you begin to see that some of the things that you have fought for, some of your publications, that spend so much of your time. I used to smoke 80 Marlboro a day, 2 cigarettes at the same time, so that I was very stingy in lighters. I used to light 1 cigarette in the morning and finish at night. Until I got my multiple myeloma, and they told me that if you don't stop, we are not going to treat you. And I stopped in 1 day. Yeah. So you have devoted so much of your energy in terms of doing a study, as you said, trials. So you need to be sadomasochistic to be doing the next trial. It is so very painful. And then you find something. And then you expect the whole world to say, fantastic, we will adopt it. And then a year goes by and 10 years go by and nothing very much happens. But then eventually, some of the things that you fought for will be adopted. That is a moment of pleasure as well. So different things.
Camille, sorry to jump in again, but I can't.
No, please.
Kypros, I'm going to disagree with you on one thing. I think obstetrics is the most important profession in the world by far.
What, medicine?
Obstetrics,
yeah.
Obstetrics, fetal medicine in particular. The whole life, it's like I have young kids now again, and 1-year-old, 2-3-year-old, everything you do, they copy, it's so important, their life, breastfeeding, etc. But in utero, even more, as you know, you can really change that life of the baby. Not only the mom diet and exercise, but what we do, the ultrasounds, the intervention. I remember when I went into obstetrics, the dean say, "Oh my God, are you kidding me? That's not that's a midwife. That's not medicine. You don't do anything. Obstetrics, you stand by. You don't do anything." Now, obstetrics doesn't exist anymore. You don't stand by. We are active. We make things change. Don't you think it's okay? I mean, with all the respects for geriatricians and cardiologists, we make a huge difference, much more than anybody else. Don't you think?
But Vincenzo, 2 things really. The first one is during a period of enormous whinginess, because there's a new generation of doctors that are constantly whinging how tired they are and this balance of life and so on. And I get angry with them. They tell them, and then you're a doctor in England. In the States, you're doing very, very well. In England, eventually, you have a salary of about £100,000. If you're a 23-year-old banker, you make 4 times as much by going into banking. Mm-hmm. But I say always to people, there's absolutely nothing else that I consider to be fulfilling in life than being a doctor. So that's a doctor. No compromise on that. The second, in terms of obstetrics, you're right, of course. I was joking about the megalomania of the doctor, because most of the time it is true. Women will get pregnant, the baby will be normal, they will have a normal delivery, and everything will be all right. The interventions that we undertake is in a small proportion of women, and of course you have a major impact for those. But of course obstetrics is the field that I love for all sorts of reasons. In terms of my new areas of research are that point about the effect on the life of somebody. One of the great victims of modern obstetrics, as the healthcare system was becoming more and more expensive, was postnatal care. So in England, we dropped that. That is not important anymore. And yet, in every single lecture that you go, whether it is gestational diabetes or preeclampsia, will say, if you develop gestational diabetes, or preeclampsia, you have had an increased risk of dying a few years later from cardiovascular and metabolic disease. And not only you dying, but also your children. And then you say, bye-bye now, we finished with you. So I started reintroducing postnatal care. And for example, we are following women up that have developed gestational diabetes. And the data is coming through now. I haven't published it, but let the world publish ahead of me if they can. We are finding that a massive proportion, 1/3 of them, have liver steatosis. Half of them have dysglycemia. 30% have hypertension. And then you say, we abandon these people. And yet, here is the big challenge, not to abandon our patients, to follow them up postnatally, and we become the new fetal medicine doctors postnatally that will properly influence, not only the long-term life of these women, but also the next generation. So if anybody is listening to this, let them have this as a challenge for new areas of research.
I love that. I love that. And as you know, you kind of touched on like the change in the practice of medicine, like the modern doctors and back then. As someone that's practiced medicine for so long and seen this evolution in medicine, what do you think are some, maybe 3 important attributes or characteristics that you think make a successful physician?
I think that you need to care. You need to care. You know, you mentioned, where was that? Somebody was saying that it was very trendy. It was very, very important to become a doctor. And certainly in Cyprus, a country that was full of peasants. We were all peasants. And then suddenly in 1960, we gained our independence. And the peasants now started going into the professions. From a village with no toilets and no electricity, if you manage to become a doctor, you jump from class 10 to class 1. So doctor was on the top of the list, and then it was lawyers and engineers and so on. But doctors were always on the top. The years went by, and there were a lot of doctors. And almost like what happened during the Russian Revolution, you had the very, very important men doctors. And then suddenly, after the Russian Revolution, there were no men doctors anymore. In most of these Eastern countries, the doctors are mostly female, and they lowered the importance of a doctor. You mentioned before the concept of a midwife, and that is what had happened in many of these in these countries. For me, and nowadays, I see that unfortunately, a lot of people, they just go to work and it's another one of the jobs. Like you work in a post office. You work from 9 to 5, you wait at 4:30, you can wait until you finish and then you finish your shift and off you go. I don't want to insult anybody, but unfortunately, I see a lot of people in this sort of way of thinking. But there are always young people that will follow us. So to me, the most important thing is to be completely committed to what you're doing. You must love what you do. You must wake up in the morning and be excited that you're going to go to work, whether it is to see patients or to see your colleagues or to see the building or to see the ultrasound machine or whatever, to love to go to work. So that's one, to love your work. And number 2, perhaps more important than number 1, is to love your patients, to feel the patients, to share the joy of the patient when you tell them the baby looks normal, and to enjoy that moment. Even if it is 30 times the same day, you see the same picture of the face, they all look the same to me, and you put the color on and you put the heartbeat on, and it's always 140 or 150, whatever, and how boring. But actually, what is not boring is when you watch the parents and you see the joy in their face. You are sharing. So the Dracula effect is not only with your junior doctors, it's also the Dracula with your patients, because they are keeping you alive. Otherwise, another scan, my God, another female, another 100 scans to pick up one abnormality. Is that exciting? No. The excitement is sharing the feelings with your patients, loving your patients. To me, that's the main thing. And sharing with your patients their moment of sorrow and sadness when things go wrong. That is the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, in medicine.
Wow. That, I think it just ties down to continuing to bring the humanity in the practice of medicine. It's so beautiful what you said. Yeah.
Exactly. Otherwise, what is it about?
Mm-hmm.
Become a banker, make 10 times as much money, and get drunk every day.
Yeah, and I have a really important question, especially with how field of fetal medicine. If you could envision anything for the future of fetal medicine, what do you wish to see happen?
It doesn't matter what I wish, actually. What is happening inevitably is artificial intelligence, and it's a bit boring, really. Whenever anybody wants to give a lecture, they talk about artificial intelligence. But let me tell you something very, very specific, where I like Bill Gates for this one thing. They have done other things, but one thing that I noticed now. So we had a course, the Vietnamese Foundation, once a year, together with ISWOC, we have a course for developing countries. There were some good doctors that were doing courses in different areas in Nigeria, for example, and they run these courses where you go along and they teach people how to find whether it's one baby or two babies, whether it's cephalic or not, and where is the placenta. And this professor was very proud because they trained 10, 15 people last year. Bill Gates has funded 6 companies to get AIs, and these companies are now ready. And I'm going to evaluate the machines. You take an ultrasound machine, and you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A few seconds later, the machine tells you gestational age, presentation, placental position, whether you have one baby or more, and the amniotic fluid. So this is a reality. And to me, that is extremely important. So it's a practical demonstration of how our field is going to change. I have zero doubts that within 3 years, because I have seen all of the companies, they're killing themselves with artificial intelligence. So these 1, 2, 3, 4 steps will not only tell you how pregnant somebody is and one baby or two and so on, but they will actually, in this capturing of the images, they will reorganize the images and they will tell you whether the baby has holoprosencephaly or a facial cleft and so on. So a lot of the fetal abnormalities would be easily detectable. That's number one. The second thing that is going to happen is genetics. In my department, I get furious with my doctors now because they have become incompetent in counseling patients and in doing an ultrasound scan. You find a talipes now, and we have a brilliant clinical geneticist, Tessa Humphreys, who's clever and funny and so on, and they have to call Tessa to come into the ultrasound department and tell them, what shall I look for next? That's absurd. So, but that's how it is. And which test am I going to do? It doesn't matter how many times I get Tessa to give lectures on exome sequencing and all of these strange new things that are happening. At the end of the day, she comes in the room and she says, this is the test that we will do. And I promise Tessa every time I invite her in a congress that I want to get rid of her. And how am I going to get rid of Tessa? Already, one of the companies, I don't want to advertise anybody, has developed a process where you find talipes, and then automatically out comes a list of the next 10 things that you have to look for, and a new list of which conditions it could be. And then you talipes, and then you go and look at the cerebellum. Is the cerebellum abnormal? Yes. And then you go down one pathway. The cerebellum is normal, then it tells you the next thing that you have to look for, and the list of possible diagnosis is constantly changing.
Yeah.
What do I do now as a doctor? Me. What did I do when they told me I had multiple myeloma? I didn't have any idea as to what is multiple myeloma. I remember from a medical school that is not a good thing to have. So what did I do? I went to Wikipedia. So I became an expert from Wikipedia of what my condition was. We do the same, don't we? Tabitha, be honest. Don't you do the same when you find an abnormality? Don't you go to Wikipedia or something pretending more sophisticated to to find out what are the other things that you have to look for, what are the investigations. Right. Well, I have no doubts that now, I'm not talking about the future because it's too dangerous to predict the long-term future. I'm thinking about the next 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. A lot of the diagnosis of abnormalities will become automated, mm-hmm. and a lot of the management of the abnormalities will become automated, because mm-hmm. all of these things will become part of the. I mean, look at how you can write a paper now, and Vincenzo, whether he likes it or not, he will be receiving more and more of these papers that were written by Mr. Oldman or his cousin. The same is going to be happening in ultrasound scanning. Now, in terms of the things where I want fetal medicine to go, beyond diagnosis of fetal abnormalities, or the treatment of the very, very few conditions that actually we have proven to be useful, we are at the moment messing around in search of a role for ourselves. Spina bifida treatment, gastroschisis fetal surgery, ventricular. I'm very much skeptical about all of these new indications, really. The proven indications for fetal surgery are very, very, very few in the last 40 years, and they're not going to change very much. But they will play in the meantime because mm-hmm. We like to play. But the real issues is how do we change obstetrics, preeclampsia, screening and management, preterm birth. Mm-hmm. It's not good enough to write boring lectures and boring papers. Preterm birth is the leading cause of death and handicap in obstetrics. How they are, and then you get a handkerchief and you start crying, and then we keep saying the same thing again and again. But how do we implement strategies to reduce the incidence of these things? Well, this is where the techniques of fetal medicine have to be incorporated, techniques and ideology, into obstetric practice, because the problem is, at least in England, we had this thing that when in the era of Campbell, in the late 70s and 80s, when ultrasound was coming in, you had a new generation of young people that became enthusiastic and took ultrasound, and you had a big chunk of other people that did not like ultrasound, or they were incompetent in ultrasound. They called themselves maternal medicine doctors. And they pretended that it was something completely different. But in England at the moment, we have fetal medicine, mainly ultrasound. Then we have obstetric physicians. Mm. If you have epilepsy, if you have thyroid disease, obstetricians don't even know how to give thyroid medication anymore. It's the obstetric physicians. And you have the people that are doing obstetrics, and they don't know how to do ultrasound. They don't know the ideology of fetal medicine. And to me, the biggest challenge is that. How do we, the three of us, the fetal medicine people, infiltrate and capture obstetrics? And that is going to be very difficult.
Oh, wow. We're way past the hour, Kypros. It has been unbelievable, and I know that we've been every number of listeners today. I personally could be listening to you for hours, and I say that very, very sincerely, Kypros. You're so inspiring, and I must have heard you speak, hundreds of times, and every time you surprise me in a wonderful new way. I don't know. As usual, we have Kavita kind of wrapping it up, so I'm going to give it to you. But Kypros, from personally, I can't wait to see you at the next conference, to interact on the next paper, and it was great to see you. But Kavita, why don't you close it up?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I completely agree, Professor. This was absolutely unbelievable. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and you truly had the epitome of someone whose life's purpose transcends yourself. And you live a life of service. And I think that is just an inspiration. So it's just so beautiful to see. And I wanted to give you a chance to say any last words to close up the session at all for all our listeners.
I'm very grateful to both of you for inviting me. I enjoyed being with you. I think I got too excited at times and I spoke too.
Never, Kypros, never.
God knows how many people must be aiming their machine guns against me, but it doesn't matter. So I thank you all very much, and I wish you well, and I congratulate you for what you started, for inviting people to inspire the new generation of fetal medicine doctors. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Inspirational person number one. Bye, everyone. Thanks for being with us.